Thank you, Rajivji. That's certainly very well presented and gives us the option of approaching the Vedantic philosophy, the Hinduism approach to life a little differently. Rajivji would entertain questions. I would request that please come up to the mic.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, and that it makes a difference in the thought process. I'm Devanathan, and I'm studying religion, and from that interest, I would like to ask that the functionality of religion itself. Whatever we talk about, you talked about Christianity on one hand, and Hinduism probably on the other module. Between these two modules, and you had categorically said that Christianity follows historicity, which is based on historical transmission, and that itself, that proposition itself, puts Hinduism in the otherness of Christianity, to mean that what we would imply as your audience, Hinduism is more on ahistoric. But from a religious standpoint, how does religion work? These two are religions. Religion has a philosophical strand, a base, upon which an event, a historical event is imagined, and that event is historicized, upon which memory is being invested, and memory carries the tradition. And thus, religion has a philosophical base, and religion has its religiosity, and it develops or generates its own historicity, and hence culture, and hence transforms into culture. So, to me, all religions are essentially ahistorical, no matter what it is. It is not Western or Eastern, but it is essentially based on a philosophical position where there is that essential unity, rather than, I would doubt for myself to see a scope of being different.
Okay, so can I answer this?
Yes, that's my question.
I'll answer. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. If you look at the history, of Christianity, Christianity did not start as a philosophical discourse and then have history imposed on it. A basic course of the history of Christianity will tell you that Saint Augustine, a few centuries after Christ, is considered the first theologian. It was devoid of philosophy. The New Testament is not a work of philosophy. It's a work of history. It's a work of God's commandments and edicts, and do this and don't do that. And it's a philosophy. It's a historical events that are happening. God comes as the main protagonist and does various things, and that history is the origin of Christianity. To bring philosophy into Christianity started what is now called theology. Theology is the philosophizing. Theology starts with Saint Augustine. And guess how he does theology? He brings in Greek thought, because the Semitic traditions do not have philosophy. And this is something debated and argued and explained very in detail in the history of Christianity. Saint Augustine is considered the first theologian, and he starts by saying that we do not have a philosophy, the Greeks have a philosophy. We have negated Greek culture and the Greek civilization because they're pagan. We don't like their religion. But they have reason. So this whole idea of revelation coming from the Hebraic tradition, the Judaic-Christian tradition, is called the Hebraic tradition. And the Hellenistic tradition, which is the Greek tradition, it brings reason. So this integration of Greek reason into Hebraic revelation is the origin of theology. So it is an Indian idea that everybody must be like us. that because we started with philosophy and then we historicized it, so therefore everybody else must be like that. It is not true. This Judaism starts with commandments of God. The common origin of all the three Abrahamic religions is God wants obedience. So he sets some rules for which you should obey. It is not philosophical. It is not speculative. It is not dialogical. It is not discovery, self-discovery. It doesn't start by saying, who am I? It doesn't start by saying, who am I? It starts by saying, who is this guy who has given me these commandments? Who is God? So the origin of religion, the first question, the first chapter in all the religion texts, studying from the Western point of view, chapter 1 is always nature of God, because it always starts with, is there a God, is there not a God? You don't have to even introduce the word God in Dharma. You have to start by saying, who am I? Huh? So if you have a room full of atheists, and they are saying, I don't believe in God, this, that logic, I don't try to argue against it. I ask them, do you believe that yourself exists? Or that yourself is non-existent? You believe that? Most of them will say, yeah, I don't know who this self is, but self does exist. Some self exists, I don't know what it is. That's a good book, if I can get them to that. Because if I can get them into, okay, I exist, but I don't know exactly who this I is, then there is this neti method. That I can walk them through a meditative process that is not this body, because the body is changing. Then another neti, thoughts and minds, they're also transition. But there's something else that seems to permanently be there that I feel is myself. So by removing, like the layers of the onion, by removing things that are not me, I can get clearer and clearer, higher and higher, closer to a sense of the self. Now this can take a person lifetime. It can take a person years to really understand this and experience it for themselves. Nowhere along the way do you have to invoke the idea there is a God in this particular method. The self-realization method is self-underlying realization method. It is not God realization method. So this is a very big difference between the desert tribes that had this fearful, angry, almost violent kind of a God visions that they were to be obedient to. And disobedience has a huge price, and that's the price Adam and Eve paid. We are all paying for it. So Islam in fact called itself, the primary word describing Islam is, the one word is obedience. It's obedience. So you cannot equate that these are the same thing. Philosophizing is a very recent development in these faiths and under other people's influences. So what has now happened is this new Christianity, as a result of first, you read in my book, I show the Hellenistic incompatibilities with the Hebraic. There's a guy called Arnold in the 1800s, a British philosopher whom I quote. He says, for hundreds of years, we've been trying to force revelation and reason. The Semitic revelation of prophets, and we're trying to rationalize it as an afterthought. Rationalizing it, philosophizing it is an afterthought. It is not the method of discovery. True philosophy, you do not start with some history and canon and fixation and then try to say, okay, now how do I prove my point? Like a lawyer in a court knows what he wants to prove, but then he has to find some reasons for it. True philosophy doesn't start with that. It starts with an openness to what the answer may be. It's a quest. None of the traditions in Islam are a quest. None of the prophets is a seeker of who am I. Each one gets the message and then he has to transmit it. None of them is a yogi, none of them has gone through sadhana to do neti and discover the self. None of them. It is basically some very extraordinary miracles happen, so amazing and so shocking, and that you have to believe that this is some supernatural being talking to me. So that history is so extraordinary, it is written down and talked to others and transmitted. And then, even in the 1800s, Arnold is saying that after several centuries of trying to bring reason in from the outside, from the Hellenistic tradition, which we have rejected their religion, they are pagan people, we have rejected their religion, but we need their reason because they are logical, they had philosophy, Greek had philosophy. So Christianity is the marriage of Greek philosophy with Semitic revelation. And the foundation is Semitic revelation, and Greek philosophy is added centuries later, and even recently, even at this point in time, they will tell you that that thing has got cracks in it, it is not properly done. So my chapter 4 chapter 3. It's called integral unity and synthetic unity. And I'm calling this kind of quality a synthetic unity. The synthesis of reason and revelation is a synthetic unity. It is not built in. It is not organic. There is a schism between the blind dogma that you must believe, obedience-oriented, and the reason that you're trying to fit into it to make sense out of it. Yeah? So it is totally, it's just a random statement with no substance at all, not historically valid at all, to say all religions start with philosophy that they historicize. That is not true. That is not true. It may be true of Indian religions. It may be true that Guru Nanak had visions, and later gurus historicized it and turned it into something else. It may be. It is probably. It may be true that we have Upanishads and we have all the great philosophical thinking, and then later people historicize it and turn it into itihas and okay, that we have to historicize it. It may be true for our case. You cannot assume that therefore it is true of all the world religions. And one of the common errors I find that our religious teachers have is they simply project non-dualism and oneness and impose it on other faiths, even though those people don't want to believe in it. Try some experiments. Go to Christians, not in the academy because they are teaching disconnected from practiced Christianity, but go to actual churches. Go to Protestant churches and ask them, are you willing to give up Nicene Creed? It's a very straight question. It's well defined what it is. Don't be vague about words like philosophy because they mean anything. They're not. So then you have to ask yourself, how am I going to reconcile it with my faith? This particular uniqueness and absoluteness and so on, how am I going to reconcile it? Go to some really expert Islamic thinkers and ask them that is the historical absoluteness of the event that the Prophet Muhammad faced, that he experienced. Is that one event, that finality of the Prophet, that perfection of the words in the Quran, that this supersedes all other teachings in the past, can it be taken with a grain of salt? Can we say that we all talk the same thing? They will say, no, it cannot be compromised. We are fond of singing, Ishwar Allah Tere Naam, means Ishwar and Allah are your name. But in a mosque, they are not allowed to sing that. Try going to your neighborhood mosque and say, I am going to bring my harmonium, and I want all of you to join in, and we will sing Ishwar Allah Tere Naam, because after all, we are all the same. They will not let you do that. Try that. Unless you have got out of the safety net and a cocoon of a very comfortable zone where you can talk about nice things, you've gone out of that into the real world of others, otherizing. You have to go to the real world of those others and let them speak for themselves, and not a scholar who is trying to make things up. Yeah? So this is my request to you, that you should go to practicing Christian churches, Protestant ones, go to Baptist, go to Methodist, go to Lutheran, the big ones. There are large market share, that's where the mainstream Christians are. And go to Islamic mosques and tell them that you want to, tell the church that we would like to install some deities because they all mean the same thing. They all mean God anyway. And we want to put Shiva because he's same as Jesus, so we like to put Shiva in the church. And we put Jesus in our temple, you put Shiva in your church. And we should all practice like that. No deal. For 25 years I've been offering in interfaith dialogues, I've been offering to Christians that let's pick any major city in the US. I'll find you a temple and you find me a church, and the deal will be that in our temple we'll install Jesus and you can come and teach about Jesus and oneness, and our Hindus will come and join in. Provided in your church we will install our deities and we will teach about them in front of your congregation. Are you willing to find me any church? I'm willing to find you a temple. Not one offer has come back. So, it's easy to talk like that, but you have to look at the lived reality. Thank you. Please.
Namaskar. Thank you for your talk. I've been listening to it, and it's very interesting. I come to this Monday, and I've grown up here in Canada, so I spent more than 40 years in Canada. And, 40 years ago, we were very much, we're still a minority, but we were very much a minority. But in that time, I've always been very comfortable in my own religion and very comfortable with the Hindu philosophy. And I've never felt an attraction, I've never felt a desire to actually become a Christian or anything like that. What I have found, though, is that I've come to appreciate what Christian faiths have that we don't have. And I think part of being Hindu is always looking at who am I, how can I improve myself, how can I get better? As you said, just that question, who am I and how do I raise myself? And so part of that for me, growing up here, has been looking at being exposed to all these other faiths and saying, okay, what is missing from my Hindu Dharma that the Christians have? And I have to say, and you talk about religion as it's practiced, and I would say religion as it's practiced, the Christian religion as it's practiced, is something that is much more, it's something that tries to improve society and cares for society. And I have to say, I mean, we're all Hindus here, but that is something that's really missing from the Hindu Dharma. That we are so absorbed in who am I, that we don't actually go and try to improve society that much. You know? And we are quite willing to live with injustice within society because we're so focused on who am I. So we see that the Christians, they do things like they come to your house to help you. They're naive 20-year-old kids, we know that, and it's fun to get them all twisted up with philosophical argument. But they are there with a good intention, which is to help them. They'll go around the world and they'll feed people. They'll go to India and they'll feed people who Indians are not feeding.
Okay, so can I answer?
So,
okay. So first of all, being different, I don't know if this is what we can do. Is it? Okay. So first of all, thanks for a good observation. Being different, as I said, doesn't mean being superior, and you can also argue being different, saying that being different in one case may be that somebody is better than us, and we can learn from them. And we can learn from them because they're different, right? So being different, the message of being different and the idea of Purva Paksha can be applied for the example you are doing, because when you're doing a Purva Paksha to the other, with mutual respect, you're studying them from your point of view. You're also finding out what's good about them, what's relevant about them. In fact, a lot of Vedanta and Buddhist debate benefit both sides, because you can see over the centuries they started improving their arguments, taking some of the good things from each other. A lot of Vedanta and Buddhism cross-fertilized each other. So the idea of Purva Paksha and otherizing is not that we are frozen and they are inferior. We can also learn from them. But to learn from them, we must appreciate that there is a difference. So that's one part of it. Now, as far as them wanting to help society, I think you said several things. Some I agree with and some I'm not sure. Some I definitely disagree with. As far as helping society is concerned, that has become part of the Christian generosity, Christian charity, Christian helping others. I would not say that this has been missing in Indian thought. It has now become missing. But there is a revival towards that. A lot of Hindu organizations are doing immense work. You don't hear about it. When there was a Gujarat earthquake, the Swaminarayan people, the Ramakrishna mission people, the Chinmaya mission people, all these people did 10 times more work than the Christian people, but in the North American news you didn't hear about it. I know that for a fact. When there was a tsunami in Nagapattinam in Tamil Nadu, we went and with Aim for Seva, we built a huge youth hospital. I went and did a documentary, it's on YouTube, and we looked at who was doing what. There was a huge PR machinery, but they were not on the ground helping people. They were more interested in converting them. So the help is more motivated towards conversion. This is a well-known fact. So what you're calling, they're out there helping me, I don't know how they're helping me. They're basically trying to convert me. So conversion as a form of help has become so deeply ingrained that many of our people actually are brainwashed into thinking that if they're converting us, they're doing us a favor. Our people have gotten brainwashed into thinking that way. And into thinking that we are incapable of helping ourselves. And therefore this idea that we are so mystical and otherworldly that we do not have material interest, we do not care about material well-being of society. Yesterday I gave a talk, the whole purpose of which was to focus on Indian contributions in a material sense, in historical terms. Indian contributions, India's economic history, you should understand, is not a history of poverty. Until 1850, India is not a poor country. India, in terms of metallurgy, medicine, textiles, shipping, major science, civil engineering, mathematics, astronomy, the export of knowledge from Nalanda and Takshashila to all over the world. Until very recent times, when the Ivy Leagues became fashionable, India was the center of knowledge and export. So this business that we, believing in who am I, have neglected the world is actually a false history that our people have been taught, and they've unfortunately learned it and started believing in it. But the true history of India, if you look back in time, is not a history devoid of scientific progress, material progress, economic progress, social care. British writers in the colonial era, one writer after another says, the average person in India is better fed than the average person in London. Says that. In the 1800s, East India Company puts a survey on India's education system and says the average person in the village is better educated here than in an average village in England. So you have to look at the colonial impact to bring down the strata of society. The Cambridge History of Economics says that till 1750, India had 24 or 25% of the world GDP, and China had a little more than that. So between India and China, it was more than half the world economy. And the West, defined as Europe and North America combined, was less than 20% of the world GDP. 100 years later, India went from 25% down to less than 2%. That's the century of deindustrializing India, the colonial impact. And during that time, the West went from less than 20% to more than 80% of world GDP. So you have to see in historical terms when these things happen, and if you look at the current state, you could go to any poor person, maybe we've stolen their money, they're poor, we can blame them, their culture and their ancestry for being poor. And when we can say we have actually come to help them. And actually, so this you could say this about Native Americans. You could say, you know, the Native Americans are no good, look, they don't have any land. Well, because who took their land? You see. So you have to look at the history of how civilizations have digested and conquered and beaten up other civilizations. I mean, Columbus was looking for India when he landed here. He was not looking for India as some god-forsaken, useless place. Why would he go? Why would the Queen of Spain invest so much money to find a useless place? It was a place which had a huge bounty of manufactured goods and a trading hub, a very rich place. They wanted to find trade routes, or ocean routes to bypass the land routes and be able to trade and bring those goods. So I think this idea that somehow in the Hindu civilization always has neglected the social dimension, the political dimension, the science technology dimension, the practical dimension is utterly false. And my foundation started a 20-volume series on history of Indian contribution to science and technology. We started that project. There is a Chinese 30 volumes by Joseph Needham on Chinese contribution to science and technology. So we thought we should do one also. We finished 9 volumes, and you're welcome to take a look at those on metallurgy, on water harvesting, on various all kinds of different science technologies that we've talked about, Harappan civilization, civil engineering, all kinds of stuff. And when you read these, and these are all written by top-notch, internationally renowned academic scholars, you will change your mind on this myth that Indians are sort of mystical, otherworldly, and the current success of Indian professionals outside India is seen as something new. But let me tell you, in the early centuries, China used to import mathematicians, doctors, university heads from India. Chinese emperors have written that. And Middle East writers talk about how there are great Indian, in terms of knowledge workers in the Middle East. Yeah? So I think a lot of these impressions we have are because we have not studied our own history correctly.
Thank you so much. It was such a fascinating talk. I just had some idea that I heard in passing several years ago that a lot of censorship took place during this Council of Nicaea, and that the idea of reincarnation really was something that was presented at the time and then rejected. And that leads me to think that there may have been a lot of political infiltration into this whole codification that took place during that time, number one. And number two, I'm hearing these days this whole idea of Christ consciousness. And sometimes when you hear Christian speakers, I feel like you're so right to say that a lot of what they're saying is rooted in this idea of unity consciousness. And some of them even talk as though they accept and the idea of reincarnation. Do you see an evolution that's taking place within their thinking?
Yes.
And is that something you think will filter down to mainstream Christianity?
No, this is a brilliant question. Brilliant questions. One is historical, one is where is the future of Christianity vis-a-vis Hindu thought. Yes, in the early Christian era, there were certain people. Christianity was not formulated into a formalized book until the 4th century. You should know that. Jesus didn't write the New Testament and he didn't ask anyone to write it. So there were a lot of theories, speculations, and Greek had ideas of reincarnation. So a lot of different views for and against existed. And Christianity doesn't start with Jesus, it starts with Emperor Constantine, who creates the New Testament in Nicaea, brings the council, sequesters them. They cannot leave this cathedral until it's done to his satisfaction. So it's like an editorial board who listen to everybody's articles and everybody's philosophy, and it's like a hearings in the Senate or Congress, and then somebody has to say, okay, I'll accept this one goes, this one is in. And so this editorial board constructs what is now called the Bible, the New Testament. So whether things were left out, what could have been the history if they were included, we'll never know. But certainly he was an emperor, he was a theocrat, he wanted to enforce a kind of an absolute theocracy and absolute state religion, rather than separation of state and church kind of thing. It was state religion by the Romans. So obviously he wanted things that Greek control. The idea that church is the intermediary between you and God was very important because that gives him power. So whereas reincarnation and you are Satchitanand means you don't need any church, you are on your own and you can be fine. You can say, the church I don't care about. You're okay. That was dangerous, that would not be good for power. So the consolidation of power, there's a very nice book called Constantine's Sword. It was a 600-700 page book, very highly acclaimed in the academic world, written about 7-8 years ago, which describes the whole history of how Constantine constructed Christianity, why he constructed certain things, excluded certain things. So that's a fascinating topic about history, but we are where we are today. Now, there is a fringe movement of Christ consciousness, unity consciousness, highly influenced by Indian thought. The 60s influenced a lot. Paramahansa Yogananda of Self-Realization Fellowship influenced a lot. And then they said that, we can take these ideas and map them onto Christianity. A lot of Swami Vivekananda's ideas, Swami Vivekananda's followers, one of them, the head of the Vivekananda Society after Swami Vivekananda, he started sort of trying to reinterpret Christianity to make it fit into Vedanta. So, moving Christianity towards Vedanta, towards your Aurobindo thoughts of collective consciousness and evolution, which has become a fashion for the last 100 years. And that's a book I'm writing on the Hindu-Buddhist influences on the evolution of Christianity. It's an important thing to understand. Now, there are several things to know about this. First, the question to ask such a person is, the question to ask yourself, and if you're a scholar of this issue, is how far can this unity consciousness, Christ consciousness, go without crossing a line such that it's Hindu and you just call it Christianity? That's the question you should ask. And I've been asking this for 20 years. I've been asking these people, okay, if you either you will stop at a point and there's some point beyond which the unity consciousness won't take it further. Like in our case, we just take it all the way. But you will either stop at some point because the historical exclusivity of Jesus is being threatened. And I want to define where that point is. So some people do have that point. Some people have that point and others just go all the way. Those who want to protect this and call it Christianity, the defining criteria, the boundary line is the exclusivity and uniqueness of Jesus' history. That's the one issue they will not give up. They will have reincarnation, they will have unity consciousness, but they will bring in an argument to say that though there is this unity consciousness, they're not willing to call it Brahman, okay? They're not willing to call it anything from our point of view. The historicity of Jesus is still important, and they give an argument. They give an argument. Yeah? And this argument is sometimes contradictory, sometimes it is hoovery, so difficult to understand what exactly they're saying. So it's good for a market that they have, where a large number of people have studied yoga and they've studied meditation and they've gotten the benefit of this non-dualism, but they want to keep their identity as Christian. So there's a good market for that, where you can kind of take all of Hinduism and keep calling it Christianity with these words, and you can sell more books. Deepak Chopra has entered that field also. Yeah? So you can sell more books. I'm told that, listen, if you could sell 100 times more stuff, you could be a big shot and we'll put you on Oprah and all that, but you have to start talking to a different audience. Okay, so I can sell out and do that. Therefore I know that, because it's a very lucrative offer, and many of our gurus have gone into that, become into that field. So the idea of repackaging Hinduism and even Buddhism with Jesus as the historical requirement is a very big bonanza for a very big market. They're dying to have these ideas, and they were previously given a binary choice that if you want these ideas, you have to leave the Nicene Creed. But they want to hang on to something exclusive and historical about Jesus and yet keep all these ideas. So that is a fine boundary, and you need to understand what is fake about it. And I'm writing a lot on where to push that they don't want to go beyond. Then there is the other segment, and I'll finish quickly because we're running out of time. Then there is the other segment where they are not interested in the historicity of Jesus. There are Christians who will say, we don't care about the exclusivity and historicity of Jesus. And who is Jesus? Well, he is just my Ishta Devta, like yours is Krishna, yours is Shiva, and so this is Jesus. And we are willing to accept many avatars, and Jesus is one of them. And Krishna, of course, we can put Krishna also, he's also another avatar. Ram is another avatar. And so those are the Christians who are truly going into Hinduism, but they just want to call it Christianity, and they are basically adopting Hinduism with Jesus inserted as another avatar for continuity of their identity and their sense of history. That's a different movement. And I'm really studying a whole lot about what these movements are all about. We have to be very clear that the issue is not what to call it. The issue is certain principles. Is the nice, and the critical argument I'm giving is, our tradition does not accept synthetic unity. It wants an integral unity, an organic unity of everything. Our tradition does not accept historical absoluteness and historical transmission such that is my only method, not just one of my methods, and different people can have different methods, but that is the only method available to man, and the absence of one's own inner ability without any history, the ahistorical method. So we have to look at principles, philosophical principles, and be less concerned about whether this organization or that organization allows or not, doesn't allow that. As long as we are clear, first of all, about these principles, then we are able to go and debate them and talk about them.
And the historical circumstances of the world today is that for the first time in centuries, the West is coming down and the rest of the world is now coming up and to an equal playing field. And once the playing field is equalized to an extent, real dialogue is going to start taking place, right? In fact, for the world to survive in the future, this dialogue is essential. And it's quite plain for me to see, looking at the websites and looking at the material, although I haven't read the book, what Rajiv is trying to accomplish here, right? And whereby this intercultural work is taking place in education, it's taking place in social society, it's taking place in economic society, it's taking place in political society. The last vista is the religious one. And it's the hardest egg to crack. And obviously Rajiv's not afraid of challenges here. He's saying there is a way through this, and he is giving us a platform in order for us to do this work. And I just have to commend him for what he's doing, for who he is, and the challenge that's out there, and his willingness to take on this hard but very significant work.
Tell us about what we were discussing, how non-dualism clicked, and how this approach is not easily acceptable to a lot of Christians, especially Protestants. And the boundary they bump into.
One of the barriers, and maybe a very significant barrier in the Christian to appreciate Vedanta, is really is the perspective of the way we view the world. Right? And in essence, the Vedantic perspective is based on a non-dual way of seeing the world, whereby the Christian and the Western viewpoint is dualistic, right? And so, so the question is, how can a discourse take place between a non-dualistic way of looking at the world and a dualistic way of looking at the world? I realize in my own situation that where I'm probably different from other people from my background is that my way of thinking is non-dualistic. When I sat into and heard Vedanta for the first time, and this was in 1980 or 1979 at a lecture by Swami Dayananda at the university, 5 minutes into the first lecture, this was a 9-day yajna, it was like all my questions, all my doubts were answered within the first 5 minutes of listening to Vedanta. So it was like I found my spiritual home. But the reason I experienced that was my way of thinking is actually non-dualistic. Looking back at it now. Now, so after that, I used to, there was a 9-day yajna, so I would invite my family, people who I thought were like me and would appreciate the same things. I invited them to attend these lectures. But what I discovered, I asked them at the end, how did you like it? And they obviously were viewing it from another set of eyes. In other words, they didn't appreciate the non-dualism and the unity that it links us to, and that unity it links us to is who we actually are. And the reason why we can sit through an hour-and-a-half lecture on Vedanta isn't because intellectual appreciation, it's because it's touching our soul. But in order for it to touch our soul, we have to have a mind that can accept, that is free to think in that way. And for that, it requires a non-dualistic way of thinking. And for most Westerners, that is, if not the biggest, it is a big obstacle for them to overcome.
You were mentioning that after 30 years of doing this, following this path of non-dualism and Vedanta, when you went to the Lutherans to get a divinity degree, monetary degree, and what was the reaction, why they were plucked? What do you think is the obstacle?
What happened is 6 years ago, I wanted to take my work in this spiritual work that we do to a higher level. And my upbringing was in the church. My grandfather was a leader in the Lutheran church. My father was a leader, was valued and worked for the church. When I was 4 years old, my father went overseas, and actually I grew up in Kodaikanal in South India until I was 15. Although this all came after that fact.
That was in the church in Kodaikanal?
Well, it was at the international school for kids. It was all missionaries, all kids from different churches that sent their kids.
Sure.
Sorry, you had the question?
So what happened when you brought this experience to the Lutheran Church a few years ago?
So 6 years ago, I wanted to take my spiritual involvement to a higher level, right? And I decided to go back to the religion that I was raised in, and which is Christianity. So I entered seminary, and I wanted to do a degree in divinity, which is for becoming a pastor. The reason I wanted to do that was because I wasn't interested in theory, I was interested in practice. I think most of you who know me is a person of action and wanting to go out there and share this knowledge with other people. So I was intentional about doing this as a leader in the church. And so in order to do that, first of all, you do it as a master's degree. And so I started my studies. But in order to become a pastor, you actually have to get the acceptance by the church itself. So there's the academic institution where you get a degree, but in order to actually work in this profession, you have to go to the church and get their blessings. In getting their blessings, there's an interview that that you have to participate in. And of course, what they're looking for is they're discerning in their mind that if you meet the expectations they have as somebody who can lead the flock in a sense. And when they ask me who I am and what brings me to seminary and where I see my future, I had to share with them that I've been involved with a spiritual organization, Hindu spiritual organization, for 30 years. Right? This I could not negate.
Did you say Chinmaya mission?
Yeah, I said Vedanta.
So they probably knew about it.
Well, they wouldn't.
They wouldn't.
But Vedanta is, I explained to them. But being involved with other religions is not an issue. The issue for them was, okay, now you're attending seminary. Their expectation was that doesn't matter anymore, now this matters. And when I could not tell them that, I told them, and I was intentional about it. I said, I've been a member of a Hindu spiritual organization for 30 years, and I still am. And you could hear this dead silence among the three people who I was petitioning to. And they struggled with that.
They didn't accept it.
And their mandate was, they had a checklist, and they had to. And one of them is discernment meant that now you see the light, this is the truth, and this is the path you're following, because you're supposed to lead the others to do the same. So when I told them that this is the light, but I also see a light over here, in their minds there was a conflict. Right? So I don't blame them for doing what they're doing. So what's happened is I've actually gone ahead and finished my degree without the concern about getting the approval of the church. So I'm a member of a Lutheran congregation. I'm on the council of the church. I do, and there's no problem there. But
you got to be a pastor.
I can't be a pastor. I can't be a pastor. But my role is to kind of open people up to what God has created and what the opportunity God has created for us, and this obviously is something that's valuable and worth sharing.
So if hypothetically there were a gathering of Lutheran theologians from the church, the kind of people who give you authority, and some people from our tradition, Vedanta tradition, and we were having an open exchange of ideas, do you feel that it is possible to change that boundary, that blockage, the Augustine mindset, or do you feel that they will be compromising their integrity and won't be easy to do that?
In seminaries, the traditional churches and the established churches all are involved with all our universities across North America. And so we have Christians who are studying in seminary, but the seminary is divided into two streams. Divinity stream is considered preparatory for becoming a priest. The other streams are academic and they're critical streams. They separate. So in the critical streams, all things are up for discussion. And Devananda is studying, is a student of Vedanta in an academic stream at U of T. So all these things, it's a critical stream. So all these things are discussed, and there's no question of, you're allowed in or you're allowed out. But in the religious stream, that's where they want things, they want to guide you, right? And they're not so open to this sort of ideas, because their concern is that your job is to lead the people afterwards, and their concern is that you're going to confuse matters up there. So.
One interesting discussion over lunch was why the Catholics and Anglicans seen for the last couple of years, because they've been working in encountering Hinduism and Buddhism, from B. Griffiths and Teilhard de Chardin and Panikkar and all kinds of great guys. They have assimilated, digested many of the Vedantin ideas and tried to reinterpret Christianity and become open. Although they are the fringes of the Vatican's power structure, still they are trying. And they're not entirely able to go all the way, but because they want to be sort of one leg here, one leg there. Now, I don't find the Protestant equivalent of that. Protestant seems to be both legs here and totally reject the dharmic side. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, there's a social and historical circumstances that you can see how one is one way and how one is the other. The Catholic Church, at one point Christianity was one church in the West, and it was the Catholic Church. So if you're one church, you have to be one church for everybody. And as people are different, you have to accommodate people in their differences, right? The Protestant churches, so the basis of the Catholic Church was three things. One was the Bible, the scripture. The other was on tradition, and the third one was knowledge was knowledge. So the Catholic, in a sense, gave equal weight to three. One of the bases for the Protestant division is that they made the Bible primary. And Protestants today still are living through that legacy. So making the Bible primary, it devalued tradition and it devalued learning and logic and so on. So the Protestant challenge is how to reacquire knowledge as a viable part of the church. In academics, it occurs, but actually how to bring it into, and they struggle with it, right? But the dialogue is taking place within the West, within Christianity. It's just that the pieces are not talking to each other. And I think what Rajiv is trying to do is create a platform where these discussions now not only can take place from Christianity to other religions, but even take place within our own individual traditions as well.
I would love to participate in the thing you were exploring, which is, you call their fringe Protestants, that we should have a dialogue with, or who are they?
Well, there's a lot of, especially, we hear about evangelicals, and in the States, there's a lot of people are very passionate about their faith and their religion. And let's say since the 60s, there's been this rising tide of evangelism. And we normally think about them as being very closed-minded and having a one point of view. But even among evangelicals, because of their passion and their thirst for religiosity, they actually are asking similar questions now. And some of the young fellows are coming up. They're now they're realizing there's more to this than just, one point of view. There's different points of view.
Can you open up some questions?
Yeah, we can open it to questions, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, wonderful.
But I have a question, Peter.
Yeah.
Can I just, when you talked about...
Could you use the mic, please?
Because then they record it.
Oh, I see. Well,
Okay.
I don't think this wants to be recorded, though. The question to you, Peter. I talked about the difficulties you're having with the Lutheran Church in accepting you as a pastor, because you've identified and admitted that you see two legs.
Right.
But isn't that the same situation with the priests in our Hindu culture, where somebody who wants to be a sannyasi going through the brahmacharya is expected to then adopt the Hindu philosophy completely? We may agree, and I think Vedanta espouses freedom of thought, which is our unique privilege. But if I were to be a priest in the Hindu tradition, clearly I would be expected to follow that same trajectory and not be open to both in my practice as a leader. So I think the situation I find would be true of any religion, would it not?
Well, you're more familiar than me with that. But what I will say is that the challenges in that committee, outside of that committee, especially among the academics in the university, and my professors in seminary, they appreciated this dialogue. They appreciated this, you know, I mean, that's their profession, is to think critically. So there's no issue at the seminary level. The issue really is at this discernment level where people are tasked with making these decisions. How, and then...
Because as a leader, a priest in any religion, the role is to lead the flock.
So I think what we could say is that the incompatibility between dualism and non-dualism is on both sides.
Yeah.
So in the dualistic Lutheran Church, they would not accept a non-dualist to become a pastor. By the same token, you're saying that in the non-dualistic Advaita Vedanta organization, they would want someone becoming a teacher to be non-dualist. Exactly. And if he said, I'm a dualist, they would say, well, then you cannot really teach.
Well, you can be a member of the congregation.
You can be a member of the congregation.
But you cannot teach and be.
So the particular philosophy to be taught has to be the philosophy of the organization. And so therefore the idea of being different is even more important. It's really a difference of dualism and non-dualism. That's really what it boils down to. We cannot trivialize that.
So I have a question for you, Raju.
Sure. So you have to hold both now. Thank you so much. Tell us your name so it's on the film.
Yeah, it's Peter Rebley.
Peter?
Rebley.
Rebley. Yeah. Thank you.
The question arises earlier in the question about the word sin for me, how we define sin. Because we talked about Adam and Eve. They were divine before the original sin entered their consciousness. So Adam and Eve were divine, and then they had this desire, and therefore sin began and flooded through civilization. In the same way, we are saying that our origin is divine. However, the reason we've taken birth is because our vasanas, which is really impurities.
Individual, not somebody else's.
Individual.
Yes.
Nevertheless, we are divine, we've forgotten our divinity, and we sin, whatever the definition of sin is, in this case ignorance. The Vedantic understanding of sin is ignorance.
But it is not transmitted, it is not a sexually transmitted condition.
Whichever way it is,
yeah.
Nevertheless, we were divine. I see parallels between Christianity and Hinduism or Vedanta.
These are well known, yes, I understand.
So Adam and Eve divine, we are divine. Then they sinned, and we know the history. We too sinned, meaning that we too became ignorant and forgot our divinity, and therefore we are here, and humanity goes on. So I think when we say that Christians believe in that we are all sinners, and we say we are not sinners, from the religious point of view, we actually say we are sinners because we are born with our vasanas and we are undoing our vasanas.
I understand the point. It's a well articulated view I can respond to.
Yeah. So to me, I see parallels rather than us.
I understand that, right? I can respond to it. Should I? Okay. So, the problem every faith has a theory on is the problem of human limitations and human suffering. That's common. Every theory, every faith has to explain, Buddha has to explain why is death, sickness. You know, everybody finds the human condition not perfect and ideal and has to come up with a theory. So the fact that there is a theory of why we are the way we are is common. The nature of the theory is different. The fact that such a theory exists is the same, but the nature of the theory is different. The idea of original sin and the idea of Maya covering me, illusion covering me, the idea that there is a false cognition. I have a false cognition and I have to change the cognition. They're very different. It is common for Hindus to sort of reinterpret the Christian thing, and a few liberal Christians will go along with it, but generally Orthodox Christians will not accept that this is as simple as a change of cognition. Because for us, liberation, moksha, is not an external intervention required that we have to believe in. It is not some other authority coming here and intervening and suffering for me, and I have to believe in it and I'm done. It is really my cognitive shift. I have to remove a veil and open and be able to live and experience that which already is in me. Nothing has to be brought in. No new thing has to be added to me. Nothing from outside has to be brought into me. Something from inside has to be uncovered. It is the uncovering which gives me that experience. Whereas you can argue all you want with a Christian and say to him, I'll keep uncovering my ignorance. I'll keep undoing, removing layers of the onion which are conditioning me, and I'll be out of this sin. He said, no deal. In fact, a big argument in the church is before Jesus came and suffered to make open the possibility of others being absolved of original sin. Pre-Christian, was it possible to be saved? And the honest answer is no. Whereas for us, that condition, which is a karmic condition, has nothing to do with pre-Krishna saved or not. Of course, anybody could be enlightened. Pre-Krishna, pre-Ram, there's nothing happening in a historical event which opens the possibility of moksha that was previously unavailable. You see what I'm saying? Krishna.
That's the Jnana, sorry, you're comparing the Jnana Yoga perspective, but from our Bhakti Marga perspective, the Lord will come and save me and my papa will be washed away will be the same thing as a Christian.
No, but first of all, let's look at many points one by one. The first point is, even the Bhakti doesn't say that there is a historical event of a third party doing something which makes this Bhakti viable, before which it was not viable, is not true. There is no historical event according to any Bhakti say such that pre-historical event it was impossible. Meera doesn't say that, Kabir doesn't say that, Surdas doesn't say it, Ramdas doesn't say that there was a date X which is called zero, like in the birth of Christ, time zero starts. That before that no one could be enlightened, no one could have moksha, no one could have that experience. That's not true. I, the Bhakti poet, have discovered this and I'm passing it on to you, and you can try this, but I nowhere does the Bhakti poet say that this is historically unique and absolute and this is the only way you can get it. No Bhakti poet ever says that in our tradition. Whereas the idea of sin requiring a unique solution, unique is underlined many times, unique solution only through that path. And the reason it is unique is that a certain suffering has been done to compensate for the original sin. And without that suffering having been done, which can only be done by a virgin birth who was not born sinner, and which can only be done once because God has only one son, without this suffering being done on your own, you cannot get rid of sin. The question to ask a theologian in order to sharpen the answer for your own satisfaction is to go to a theologian and say, is it possible for a sinner, who we all are, to absolve himself of the sinful condition without Christ? Is it possible? And the answer is no. In fact, after Gandhi died, a debate started in the church that did Gandhi go to heaven or hell? Because Gandhi did not accept Christ. And so if Christ is a necessary condition to go to heaven, then Gandhi couldn't have gone to heaven. And if the church had declared that Gandhi being so nice had gotten rid of all these problems of his own effort, therefore he's gone to heaven, it would devastate the church claim of exclusivity that we are the only path. Because if Gandhi can do it, so can you, so can everybody else. So this is a recent blog on Huffington Post, somebody wrote this, and this is, you go and search, did Gandhi go to hell or Gandhi go to heaven? You get a lot of old articles from the church. After arguments have been heard on are good deeds enough without getting one savior involved, are good deeds enough? the declaration is that Gandhi could not have gone to heaven. So this is a very serious difference. It is not metaphorical. The idea of sin is not equatable, even though they're both problems. The idea of illusion, delusion, cognitive dissonance, bad karma, and the idea of sin are similar in the sense they're both problems that have to be resolved. But the options available in the resolution of sin is limited to the Christian good news. And it is not that you have the solution in you and you have the divinity in you. Now you have to understand a deeper reason for this difference. Christianity is not about Tattvamasi. You, a Christian, cannot have the Jesus experience. A Christian cannot say, I am Christ, I am Jesus. He cannot say that. That is considered in fact blasphemy. And that is considered often idol worship, because you are idolizing your own self. You can say, I have Holy Spirit that comes to me. That's the closest divinity you can have. You can have Holy Spirit come to you, enter you. And not that Holy Spirit is always present in you, like Satchidanand is always there with you.
The Bible says the kingdom of heaven is within you. I am within you.
I am not I am within you. Kingdom of heaven is within you. Kingdom of heaven is within you. But then it's a huge question of interpreting what you mean by the kingdom of heaven. Kingdom of heaven within you, the dualist would interpret that it is within your reach, it is within your power to comply, to be obedient, and then you will get it. But the kingdom of heaven within you, as we understand it, is not the way it is interpreted. You see, what you can do is you can take the words of any tradition and you can interpret them to fit your idea. Always we can do that. I could do that with Bin Laden also. I could do that with Hitler, we could do it with Ravana, at some level of abstraction, we can say that that we can make them look like us. The question is whether that is how they see it. So there is possibility. People have written books called Christian Vedanta. Thomas Keating, Father Keating, and Wayne Teasdale, they wrote these kind of books. At the end of these journeys into Vedanta for many decades of their lives, writing these books, going to India, living in Deep Griffith's ashram, these guys did, and writing actually on all that. At the end of that, criticizing Christianity's limits, praising the Vedanta, merging them, experimenting them, finally coming home and trying to sell it to the Christian establishment, running into a roadblock that it will devastate, demolish the whole church power structure, because if we are not the exclusive franchise from God, and it is something everybody can do, our whole power structure is gone. Facing that, they got redigested back into Christianity. Then they start talking about how there is flaws in Vedanta. It teaches you otherworldliness. It is irresponsible. It creates social problems. And therefore, after having learned all that and brought it into Christianity, we finally have to reject it. And the Christianity is the only way. So they made all these journeys. I'm going to show this in my book. They made lots of journeys into Hinduism and Buddhism, praised it, brought all these ideas back, reinvented, reinterpreted Christianity, but at the end they had to reject or find some limitation or flaw in the Hindu sources which they used. So at the end it is not equal, it is something unequal.
The Christianity you talk about the Nicene Creed.
Nicene Creed, yeah.
Starting from that. But what about the Essene Creed, which is pre-Nicene, as
yes.
far as I understand, which is not limited to Christ. I see it as a spiritual seed of Christianity, similar to Vedanta and Hinduism, Essene thought, Essene creed, and Christianity.
Yes.
So where does that factor in Christianity?
So,
because I think we're seeing one aspect of
Christianity. No, we're seeing Christianity as seen by Christians today. We're not seeing as Christianity as it might have been or as it should have been. We're not reinventing Christianity to fit our model. We are saying if you go to 100 churches and you go to mainstream churches, not these what are they called? Not Quakers. Who are these guys? Are very
Pentecostal.
Not Pentecostal. These Unitarian. Yeah, except for Unitarian, and their census will show you it's less than 1% of the American Christians are Unitarian. 99% are not. So it really hardly matters. They're really fringe. Unitarian is the only one that will accept many avatars and many deities and all that you can do. And even they are now limiting. They're even closing that nowadays. But most of the churches you go to, you speak to the authorities like he talked about. You can theorize, you can argue with them. The question is he going to teach in his congregation that because of the Essenes, therefore the Hindus are same and we can respect it? He's not. So you may imagine that we are same as them. He is not imagining that he is same as you. And if X is the same as Y, then Y must be the same as X. And X can only be the same as Y. If I am same as you, I'm going on saying I'm same as you, you are not accepting it. Then it's one-sided. So this is a kind of, what I'm explaining this is, why is there a need we have? Is it an inferiority complex? Is it a complex that says, I'll be legitimate if I can show that in fact there's nobody else different, we're all like me? Is it a complex? And why am I not able to say, this is the ground I stand on? And others can agree, disagree, but my principles are clear. And my teaching is not based on trying to show same or not same. My teaching is to teach very authentically what my tradition is. I'll give you a very good answer I got from a Buddhist, Thai Suthu Rinpoche. He's one of the top 3-4 Tibetan Buddhists, in India. Dalai Lama, the Karmapa, and he does all of the top 3. So I had a day-long discussion, private discussion with him. And I said, Thai Suthu Ji, I face this issue with a lot of Hindu gurus, but I want to ask you as a Buddhist, when people say, are Buddha and Christ the same? What is your answer? He gave me the right answer. He said, look, I can tell them what Buddha is. I cannot tell them what Christ is because I haven't had that experience. My truth is not some cut and paste text. This text might mean that, they might mean that, nothing. My truth is experiential. I've experienced the things that Buddha is talking about, and I will only teach what I know from my experience, and not some text analysis. Yeah? And I only know Buddha's teachings, and I can teach that. Now, whether Christ's teachings are the same or not, since I haven't had the experience, it would be dishonest for me to claim either way. So I don't know whether they are the same or not. So when a Christian asks me, are Buddha and Christ teaching the same thing? I will tell him, look, learn from me if you want. From me, I can teach you what Buddha is saying. And then you can decide for yourself if the Christ experience you have is the same or not. But I don't want to modulate what Buddha is saying to fit something else to meet the market requirements. See, that's the point. So you can keep working the permutation and combination of Christian history from all sides. And you can say there's always this dissenting voice and that dissenting voice. There's also Meister Eckhart. There were a lot of these people. And this guy dissented and said this, and this guy said that. And maybe keep looking until you find some little thing you can click and say, that's Vedanta already in Christianity. That's the project that has been going on from the Christian side to mine Hinduism for ideas, for resources, and then go look for something even obscure, even a little footnote, and say, and blow it out, make it into the main thing, and say, that was already there. That was already there. And I'm calling that the U-turn theory, when people come U-turn back into their tradition when they're looking for a historical source into which they can locate that. So there's a whole U-turning of Dharma back into Judeo-Christianity. It's a very large enterprise. And unfortunately, a lot of our people are actually helping that because they're confused. So my feeling is the project for the people in Dharma is to understand the Dharma first and foremost. We are having enough difficulty understanding that and transmitting that. Mixing it up with something else because it will be popular, it will be easier, it will be politically fashionable, is not serving the purpose of explaining what it is. It's sort of like saying, let's equate Atman with soul, because some guys also believe in soul as having reincarnation. Some guys believe soul is unity, consciousness. That may not be the dominant view. That may not be what the average guy is saying. But I, the expert, when I'm going to eliminate Atman from my vocabulary, keep talking about soul all the time, I know that I'm talking in that sense. Now for me it's okay, but each generation that reads my stuff gets further and further confused about the distinctiveness of Atman, because as the next generation starts picking my words about soul and start talking about it, the people they're talking to who are giving them feedback are reinforcing a different idea of soul. So even though I would not be confused by using that word, but other people who are reading my stuff and then their readers and their readers are not on the same solid ground, and they're going to get confused. So from a pedagogical point of view, from a teaching point of view, to take a well-defined tradition that we are trying to pass on and map it onto the fringes of another tradition, not even the mainstream of that tradition, but the fringes of that tradition, a historical fringe of some tradition, doesn't do much for our cause. That's why I am opposed to focusing on looking for what is same. We need to look for what is distinct and different, because that's how you can create a sense of who we are and what is our contribution, even to Christians. Even to Christians, what is our contribution is based on certain ideas. And you know, an easier way to reframe this debate is don't use the word Hindu and don't use the word Christian. Just have propositions. Just say that there is this proposition about the nature of the self and the nature of the divine and the nature of the cosmos. These are philosophical ideas. And maybe Essenes in some ways related to it, in some ways they did not. That's fine. Maybe Constantine didn't relate to it much. Maybe Catholic Church, most of them don't relate to it, some people do. So you can have a huge matrix of who relates to what aspect of our world. And that's more authentic than saying all of Christianity and all of Hinduism, because that way you run into these kind of problems. You start looking for minor exceptions somewhere and making an equation.
The thing is, we seem to be comparing Vedanta with Christianity, today's Christianity, rather than the Essene aspect of it, with modern Christianity. But I wonder whether we should be looking at modern Hinduism with modern Christianity rather than Vedanta and Christianity. If we're going to talk about Vedanta, then we need to talk about the Essenes, because that is where, and then go to the root and then come down to today. No?
Essenes don't occupy the same status in Christianity as Vedanta occupies in Hinduism.
Vedanta is small. I think somebody said earlier it's still a small percentage of those who are pursuing Vedanta.
No, but in my book, that's why I call it Dharma and I don't call it Vedanta. Okay. So I have 4 criteria of difference. And Vedanta is just one subset of Dharma. When I say integral unity is the word Purna. And the one becomes many, and the many are really not separate from the one, they're really all included in the one. And there is no synthesis between two opposing views. One is a revelation view, one is a reason view, and they have to be synthesized together. That is a synthetic unity. There is no synthetic unity of God, Word, and souls as separate entities that have to be synthesized together. So I go through great length in this is chapter 3 to explain the difference between integral unity and synthetic unity. I don't say Hinduism, I don't say Vedanta, I may use them as examples, but in the integral unity is many dharma traditions, including Buddhism, including Jainism, are integral unity. It's not just Hinduism, it's also Buddhism, Jainism. It is not just Advaita Vedanta, it is also Vishishta Advaita Vedanta, it is also Shaivism, it is also Sri Aurobindo. I've talked to ISKCON people, ISKCON theologians, and make sure that their ideas are included. So there is a family resemblance among the dharma diversity. Family resemblance, philosophically, among all the dharma diversity, there is a family resemblance. And this resemblance, this common denominator, differs from the family resemblance in the Abrahamic religion, which is a synthetic. And then the idea of adhyatmic path as contrasted with obedience to a historical event which is unique is again very common. You will see a huge amount of commonality across so much dharma, and then on the Abrahamic side a huge amount of commonality on their side. So I am not comparing Hindu and Christian or Vedanta and something. I have a paradigm which is a common dharmic paradigm, which is very difficult for me to construct this paradigm. It took a lot of manthan with many schools of thought to come up with something that would be acceptable as pretty common with some exceptions. And contrast this common family resemblance within dharma with the commonalities of the Abrahamic tradition. That's basically what I'm doing. And there are philosophical assumptions that are different at that level. And so I don't accept that Essenes are today a living philosophy within the Christian church. I mean, they're there, they were gone, finished off. And it's also, you talk to some of the Gnostic scholars like Elaine Pagels at Princeton University, you get many different views on who exactly they were. Some will even say they were Hindu people. Some people say that. Plotinus was Hindu. Some people say that. Plotinus was Hindu or Buddhist. The professor at Rice University who wrote a book, big 600-page book on just that idea. So I don't bring those guys in because they're not what is called Christianity. And they may have been pre-Christianity, they may have been an influence, they may have been a little fringe group, and also exactly what their beliefs were are also not that sharply defined. Some fragments here and there exist. It is not relevant to today's interfaith dialogue, where different faiths are trying to work out. If one faith comes with an assumed interpretation of the other faith to make him look like that. Yeah, that is the problem with the Hindus, especially the Vedantins, is we want to imagine others to be as close to us as possible, makes us comfortable, because we suffer what I call difference anxiety. Chapter 1, I call difference anxiety. Yeah? Difference anxiety is somebody's anxiety that somebody's different. Could be gender difference, could be class difference, could be ethnic difference, could be language difference, could be religious difference, any kind of difference. The anxiety that you're different, I am a little uncomfortable, I would rather that you be same. Now this difference anxiety has caused genocides to get rid of people who are different, slavery, all kinds of problems that happen. And the opposite of difference anxiety is difference celebration. Difference is leela. And there's nothing wrong with it. And just like the apple and the orange are not the same, nothing wrong with either of them. Yeah? And we respect that. That creation is with difference. Otherwise there will be no leela, there will be no creation. So similarly, world views and cultures and civilizations and their ideas of divine also have difference. There's nothing wrong with that. So the opposite of difference anxiety is to have mutual respect for difference. And so the difference anxiety can be inferiority complex difference from below or superiority complex difference from above. So the inferiority complex difference anxiety is I'm inferior, these guys rule over me, they're superior. To be legitimate, I should talk like them, I should translate my words to fit into their language, I should have the same body language, the same aesthetics, the same clothes, I should put white cream, I should become white, it's very popular in India now, I should have their accent, I should do all those things. So that difference anxiety from below is sort of a very devastating thing for the person to live with that. And a lot of our people are actually living with difference anxiety. That was the colonial project, to do that. The difference anxiety from above is a superiority complex that says, I should convert others to be like me, because I'm right, and there's something wrong if they are not like me. I'll either genocide them, slave them, get rid of them, colonize them, civilize them in my image. Something I have to do because there's something wrong with them just because they're not like me. And the first chapter of this book takes on this issue of difference anxiety precisely because I wrote this chapter later. Because when I sent this book for reviews, the manuscripts, Christians who were very clear, authorities on Christian, accepted that there is difference. Then they may quibble about whether the difference is exactly what I said or not, but they're not trying to be the same. They're very clear. Like the Lutheran guys would probably respond and say very clear there's difference. And they may have a different way of explaining it. The Hindu side had a lot of difference anxiety. I didn't have the term until I wanted to come up with a term to say what's wrong with these guys. Why are they afraid of difference? Why are they constantly going on saying which is not the same, if this is the same? We will find one weird example where it was the same, must be the same. And so let's look at the sameness. And so one day it came to me in the morning after my meditation, the flash idea came that, this is some kind of a condition. I have to give a name for it. So I came up with difference anxiety. And that's why I wrote chapter 1 as a first chapter to get rid of this idea of difference anxiety. Otherwise people are not even going to read the rest of the book. Because if they have difference anxiety, they don't want to know being different. So many people wrote to me saying, Rajivji, please write a book being same. Write a book being same. Don't write a book being different. Because we'd love to have a book called Being Same. It is so happy. Indian publishers, this sort of a popularity of that is so big. So my whole program is to make people comfortable with being different. And that is the background and the foundation of multiculturalism. Any society to be multicultural must be able to create that sense of comfort and joy and celebration. That we are different and there is nothing wrong with it. So you could have pluralism as multiplicity of views, different traditions, different truth claims, not all collapsed as the same, and nothing wrong with it. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, so I completely agree with what you've said because of my own interests in this field for about past 20 years. I've not only read good books on history, R.C. Dutt and the rest, the original people who researched on what India was, but also through a lot of historiography, how history was written down for us. So my question is only basically I'm voicing my son's question. He had this question at a forum that we went, and his question was, this is a very literal question, it's a research question, not really theology. He said, why, he asked the panel, why has India singularly been it's been a root bed of plurality. Why is it that India has accepted plural views? Why is it that India has been the birthplace of 4 major religions of the world?
Okay, I'll answer
Such
that.
plural views is hardly a view left out.
Okay,
right?
This is the basis of chapter 3 and 4. And in the interest of time, I hate to say read those, but I will have to tell you that. I explain the meaning of dharma, why it's not the same as religion. That's another category I don't like to be translated. The problem with religion and the difference of dharma, the idea of swadharma, the idea of dharma in context of time and place, time and circumstance, is very deep part of dharma. Now, why are so many rishis with all different views okay for us? Why are so many enlightened beings each write their own book of experience? See, Ramakrishna's book is his version of the like Jesus experience, and Raman Maharshi's is his, and everybody's got the enlightened beings are writing their experience. Why is it that we don't have to collapse all that and say there's one book and one valid truth and everybody must fit into that and those who don't fit must be thrown out? Why? Why is this an open canon rather than a closed canon? And this is very important to understand. This is the basis of pluralism, because we can accept, the architecture is an open architecture which can accept many things. So the moment you collapse it as religion and you give up the distinctiveness of dharma, you've lost that pluralism, and in a few years we'll also become dogmatic, and we are, because a lot of people have started reinterpreting Hinduism as a Semitized religion with Ayodhya and Ram and one linear history and all that kind of stuff. And that is not the flexibility and fluidity of dharma. So to understand why dharma allows ongoing experiences which are Shruti, revelation to the enlightened rishi is Shruti, and all the enlightened beings that we respect are giving us that truth. The reason is Satchitanand, rather than historical revelation which is closed, is the difference. If historical revelation is the only access to the ultimate truth, I have no recourse to it myself, no matter what I try. There is no meditative state which will give me the same truth that Jesus had. If that's the idea, then I have to go with the historical claims and the historical truth, whether it is distorted or not, however best I can get it, I have to go with that. And I'm stuck and I'm blocked, closed. But if the worldview is that I can have that experience, I can have the highest state of consciousness possible. And there is no higher state of consciousness than that. So it is possible for a human being, it may take many lives, but it is possible for a human being to experience that. And every century there are a few people who have, and so we can learn from that. This gives us pluralism, because you have you have renewal of tradition, renewal of spiritual dharma. For every time and place there's some new guy coming who has achieved that. So the original divinity in us is the source of multiplicity of enlightened beings, and multiplicity of enlightened beings over time gives us multiplicity of ideas and traditions and paths. Could be bhakti people have come, could be whoever has had that experience can teach about it, and others can follow or not follow. So this is the bedrock of pluralism. And the moment we become history-centric, the moment we canonize, the moment we become people of one book, and the moment we close the canon and say it is perfect and you can't change it, then it's a matter of time before any diversity will have to collapse into this, and we will no longer have this. So this is the quality we must not give up. This quality of pluralism, which is rooted in the quality of Satchit Anand and hence multiplicity of experiences. This is what is distinct. This is the ultimate difference that your question brings up. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajivji. I had a question myself, but I'll hold on to that. We want you to know that you have a standing invitation. Come and visit us anytime you happen to be in Toronto, because we would all love to continue this dialogue, from the number of people who have raised their hands to ask you questions. There is a lot of interest in that. So thank you very much once again. Swamiji, may I request you to come and present a token of our appreciation to Rajivji?
What can we offer but Guru has taught?
This is the best thing for me. Thank you so much.